It all starts at a funeral, a moment of grief, honor, and family. But when a small-town sheriff steps out of line and dares to pull a gun on a U.S. Army general in front of a crowd of mourners, he thinks he's in control. What he doesn't know is she just picked a fight with the wrong woman. This isn't just a story about one bad cop. It's a story about truth, betrayal, and a nation watching in real time as justice is put to the test. And let me tell you, you're not going to believe how this ends. So before we dive in, do us a favor, drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you're tuning in. We'd love to hear from you. Let me tell you about General Eliza Monroe. Some called her the Quiet Storm, a woman who carried the weight of history on her shoulders without ever asking for applause. She didn't need it, because her record spoke louder than any headline. 4 stars shining on her uniform, the first Native American woman to ever reach that rank in the United States military. She had served across 4 continents, led men and women in combat zones the rest of us only see on the news. Her name had become a symbol of breaking barriers, but none of that prepared her for the moment she stepped off that airplane back on American soil. Eliza wasn't coming home as a hero this time. She was coming home as a mother, a grieving mother. Her son, Lieutenant Samuel Taylor, was gone. A so-called training accident on a base in Nevada, that's what the official report said. But any parent who's worn that uniform knows the cold weight of words like that. Something about it felt wrong, too clean, too convenient. But grief doesn't wait for answers, it just weighs you down. And on that long walk through Houston's International Airport, you could almost see that weight pressing on her. Every step she took was heavier than the last. Her uniform was crisp, every ribbon and medal perfectly aligned. She wore it not for herself, but for Samuel. Because she had promised him once if anything ever happened, she'd bury him in full honor in the colors of the country they both swore to defend, the American flag. Passengers watched as she walked by. Some whispered, some nodded. A little girl even ran up to her, clutching a notebook, asking shyly for an autograph. Eliza knelt down, signed her name, and told the girl softly, "This uniform belongs to all of us." But just when that small moment of pride tried to settle in, reality hit harder than ever. At the security checkpoint, standing there with a smirk on his face, was Officer Derek Fuller. Mid-40s, buzz cut, a badge that had seen better days. He didn't look at her uniform. He didn't see the stars on her shoulder. All he saw was her skin, brown, native. A woman who, in his mind, didn't belong in that uniform. "Random screening," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Eliza knew better than to argue. She'd been through this song and dance before, but this time felt different. Officer Fuller didn't ask polite questions. He demanded she remove her jacket right there in front of everyone, exposing her medals as if they were stolen jewelry. He mocked her name on her ID, questioned if she had really earned that rank. "You expect me to believe you're a general?" he sneered. "Looks fake to me." The crowd around them shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. Eliza could feel the eyes on her, burning into her skin. But she stayed calm. Because that's what soldiers do. "I'm here to bury my son," she whispered. Fuller didn't flinch. He waved her aside like she was a problem to be dealt with later. What should have taken 5 minutes turned into 2 hours of humiliation. 2 hours of being treated like she didn't belong to the very country she'd spent her life defending. And just when she thought it was finally over, he leaned in close, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Be careful where you step in this town, General. Not everyone's impressed by your stars." Eliza left that airport with her head held high, but deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Something was waiting for her in Houston, something bigger than one bad cop. And the battle she was about to face wasn't on any battlefield she'd ever trained for. 3 hours after that airport humiliation, General Eliza Monroe sat alone in the back seat of a black SUV, staring out the window as the Houston skyline came into view. The city looked smaller than she remembered. Smaller, but heavier somehow. Every highway sign, every building, every block carried memories she hadn't asked for. She wasn't just coming home to bury her son, she was coming home to face a silence that had started long before Samuel ever put on that uniform. The house felt frozen in time. Same porch swing, Same flag hanging by the front door. Same quiet neighborhood where she used to watch Samuel ride his bike until the streetlights flickered on. The kind of place that looks safe from the outside, but you know better when you live there long enough. Family had already started gathering. Soldiers from Samuel's old unit, cousins, neighbors. They all tried to fill the space with food and small talk. But Eliza? She couldn't breathe in that house. Not yet. So she did what soldiers do when the walls start closing in. She retreated to the quietest room in the house, Samuel's old bedroom. She hadn't set foot in there since before he enlisted. The posters on the wall, the trophies on the shelf, they were like landmines of memory. She sat on the edge of his bed, finally letting herself cry for the first time since she got the call. That's when her father, Walter, knocked softly on the door. He didn't say much. He just stood there, a Vietnam veteran leaning on a cane, carrying the same kind of weight in his bones that she now carried in her heart. They said it was an accident, he finally muttered. But I don't buy it. Eliza wiped her face and looked up. What are you talking about, Dad? Without a word, he handed her a small envelope. It was sealed with Samuel's handwriting on the front. For Mom, only if something happens to me. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a flash drive, barely the size of a quarter. Eliza grabbed her laptop and plugged it in. What she saw made her blood run cold. Dozens of folders. Names, dates, photos, reports. Samuel had been investigating something huge. A secret network of law enforcement officers who called themselves the Dominion Circle, a group that had been systematically targeting Black, Latino, and Native service members, harassing them, framing them, making sure they never climbed too high in rank. And right there, in several surveillance photos plain as day, was Officer Derek Fuller, the same man who humiliated her at the airport. Samuel had flagged him as a known enforcer for the Dominion Circle. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. All this time, Samuel had been trying to protect others, exposing a network so much bigger than she could have imagined. And now? He was gone. Before she could process it, there was another knock at the door. It was her daughter, Mia, and standing next to her was a young police officer Eliza had never seen before. Nervous, fidgeting, eyes darting toward the hallway. "Mom," Mia whispered, "this is Officer David Chen. He worked with Samuel. He's been waiting to talk to you." Chen stepped forward, voice low and shaking. "Your son, he didn't die in an accident, General. He was getting too close to exposing them. He told me if anything happened, I had to come to you. You're the only one who can finish what he started." Eliza felt the weight of those words sink deep into her soul. This wasn't just a funeral anymore. This was a war, a different kind of war, one she never trained for, one she couldn't walk away from. And tomorrow, that war would find her at her son's grave. While Eliza Monroe sat in her son's old bedroom, reading the files Samuel had risked his life to gather, something much darker was already moving on the other side of the city. About 20 miles away, tucked inside a dimly lit back room of a bar called the Iron Spur. Houston's oldest police fraternity gathered. They weren't wearing badges tonight. No uniforms, no body cameras, just men sitting around a heavy oak table under a flickering neon beer sign. And right at the head of that table, Sheriff Richard Dugan. Dugan was a legend in certain circles, a 40-year law enforcement veteran, decorated on paper, but feared on the streets. He wasn't just a sheriff, he was the architect of the Dominion Circle, a secret network of police, deputies, and federal agents scattered across Texas and beyond. A network built to do one thing: keep people like Eliza Monroe in their place. Dugan took a long sip of his whiskey, leaned back in his chair, and slapped a photo down on the table. It was Eliza. In uniform. Walking through the airport earlier. "She's here," he said flatly. "And she's already stirring up trouble." The men around him grunted, some smirking, others checking their phones. One of them leaned forward. "We thought the airport was enough of a warning." Dugan's jaw tightened. "Apparently, it wasn't, and tomorrow, she'll be standing front and center at that funeral on public ground, with cameras rolling, pretending she's some kind of hero." Another officer at the table, a sergeant with deep ties to the state troopers, leaned in. "What's the play, boss?" Dugan cracked a slow, chilling smile. "We remind her whose country this really is." He reached into a leather folder and pulled out a security detail roster. All 20 names had already been handpicked, every single one of them a trusted member of the Dominion Circle. Officers who knew exactly what was expected of them and what would happen if they failed. Dugan continued, "She'll be surrounded by our people. From the moment she sets foot on that cemetery ground, we don't touch her in the shadows. We do it in the open, right in front of every camera. Make it look legit. Make it look like she's the problem." He stood up, pacing slowly around the table. "We'll claim she resisted. Reached for something. We'll have the story ready before she even knows what hit her." One of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably. "You sure the department's gonna back us on this?" Dugan leaned down, planting both hands on the table, staring him dead in the eye. "We are the department." The room fell silent. He straightened up, nodded toward the door. "You all have your orders. Tomorrow, we remind her and anyone watching that the stars on her shoulder don't mean a damn thing when you stand on our ground." As the men filed out of the room, Dugan stayed behind, staring at the grainy security photo of Eliza Monroe. His lips curled into a grin, almost like he was looking forward to it. Back on the other side of town, Eliza stood on her porch, clutching the flash drive to her chest. She didn't know their names yet. She didn't know their faces, but she could feel it. They were coming, and she was ready to meet them. The next morning broke with a strange kind of stillness. The kind that makes the air feel heavier, like the world itself is holding its breath. Eliza Monroe stood by her bedroom window, staring at the dark clouds rolling in over Houston. The forecast said clear skies. But she knew better. This was the kind of storm you couldn't see on radar. By the time she arrived at Pine Grove National Cemetery, hundreds of people had already gathered. Soldiers in uniform, neighbors from her community, family, friends, men and women Samuel had served with. Faces marked by grief. And something else. Something sharper. Like they knew today wasn't going to end the way anyone expected. The cemetery director, Mr. Harold Stone, met her at the gates. He looked nervous, clutching a clipboard tighter than necessary. "General Monroe," he started, not meeting her eyes. "We've had some changes to the service location." Eliza narrowed her eyes. "What kind of changes?" Stone cleared his throat. "We've reassigned Captain Taylor's service to the East Garden section." Eliza felt her jaw clench. East Garden. Locals knew it by another name. The old colored section. A relic from another time that the cemetery had quietly kept around under a new name. It was where they used to bury black soldiers out of sight, away from the memorial walls, away from the white families. "No," Eliza replied flatly. "My son earned his place in the Valor section. His service. His sacrifice. Our contract confirmed it." Stone shifted on his feet, glancing nervously over her shoulder, as if looking for someone. "I'm sorry, but the decision's been made." Eliza reached into her bag, pulling out the paperwork copies of military regulations, cemetery policies, and her signed agreement. She held them up like a shield. "My daughter is an attorney. We can settle this here or in federal court." Stone swallowed hard, and for a split second, it looked like he might push back. But then, from behind the maintenance shed, a man in a dusty work shirt stepped forward. "Ma'am," the man said softly. "I'm Mike Saunders. My boy, James, served with your son. They were like brothers." Eliza's face softened. She remembered James. Samuel had written about him, how they watched each other's backs overseas. Mike glanced at Stone, then back at Eliza. "You deserve the Valor section, ma'am, and so does your boy." Stone finally let out a heavy breath. "We'll honor the original arrangement." Eliza nodded once, turning back toward the waiting crowd. But before she took another step, Mike gently touched her arm. "Be careful, General. I've seen police coming by here all week, asking questions, mapping out the grounds, asking where you'd stand during the service." Eliza's stomach tightened. She knew it wasn't just idle curiosity. It was preparation. By the time the service began, the rain had started to fall. A slow, steady drizzle that dampened the air and the mood. Military honor guards moved in perfect formation. The flag-draped coffin stood under the white canopy. The sound of taps echoed across the cemetery, pulling tears from every corner of the crowd. Eliza stood tall, right beside Samuel's casket, wearing her full-dress uniform, medals shining, stars gleaming, a mother carrying both pride and unbearable loss. She took the podium, looking out over the crowd, over the cameras, over the sea of faces waiting for her to speak. "My son," she began, voice steady, "believed in a country worth fighting for, a country that could rise above its darkest history and deliver on its greatest promise." She paused, looking directly at the uniformed officers stationed around the perimeter. All of them Dominion Circle, all of them watching her like hunters waiting for a signal. He believed in truth. He believed in service. And he died uncovering something that threatens both. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Samuel discovered a network, right here in our city, a network that targets soldiers, officers, people of color, to keep them silent, to keep them afraid. The officers shifted. One of them, standing closest to the stage, started speaking into his radio. Eliza's voice didn't shake. It got louder. "He gathered names, he gathered proof, and he trusted me to carry it forward." And just as she reached for the folded flag sitting on the stand next to his casket, Sheriff Richard Dugan moved. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He walked straight toward her, pushing past the honor guard, hand already resting on the grip of his sidearm. The crowd murmured, confused. Camera zoomed in. Eliza felt the shift in the air, like the whole world tilted. And then she heard him. "General Monroe," Dugan announced, his voice loud and sharp, cutting through the falling rain. "You need to come with me now." Eliza froze. And before anyone could move, before anyone could stop him, Dugan drew his weapon and pressed it against her temple. Time seemed to stop. There was no sound, no movement, only the sight of Sheriff Richard Dugan standing over General Eliza Monroe, with a loaded gun pressed hard against her temple. The silence was crushing. The flag she had reached for Samuel's flag sat untouched, just inches from her trembling fingers. You could feel the weight of it all hanging in the air. Hundreds of people, frozen in shock. Soldiers in uniform, veterans holding back tears, family members covering their mouths. And the cameras, all pointed right at them. Dugan leaned in, his voice low but sharp enough for the nearby microphones to catch. "You think those stars make you untouchable?" he hissed through clenched teeth. "Not here, not today." But Eliza didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She kept her eyes locked on that folded flag. With a breath barely louder than a whisper, she answered, "I earned every one of these stars, and my son earned this ground." Dugan's finger twitched on the trigger. Somewhere in the crowd, a baby started crying. An older man shouted something no one could quite hear. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. And then, a single gunshot rang out. Screams erupted. People ducked. Some dropped to the ground. But the shot hadn't come from Dugan's gun. It came from behind them, from one of the perimeter officers, Officier Javietars, the rookie, the one who looked scared the whole morning. He had fired a warning shot into the air. His hands were shaking so badly you could see the gun trembling from 30 feet away. "She's reaching for a weapon!" someone yelled. The lie hit the crowd like gasoline on fire. In the chaos, Dugan shoved Eliza down to the ground, his knee driving into her back, grinding her face into the wet grass beside her son's coffin. The cameras were still rolling, every second, every brutal frame. Dugan barked orders over the noise. "General Eliza Monroe, you are under arrest for assaulting a law enforcement officer and attempted use of a concealed weapon at a public event." The absurdity of it was almost too much to believe. Eliza didn't have a weapon. Everyone could see that. But Dugan didn't care. This was the show he had planned. The spectacle designed to break her right in front of the nation. Mourners started pushing forward, shouting, pleading. One voice rose above the rest, Mia, Eliza's daughter. "It's all on video," she screamed. "We have everything on video." But Dugan didn't stop. He grabbed Eliza's wrists and slapped the cuffs on tight. Tight enough to leave mark. Her father, Walter, despite his cane, tried to charge toward them. 2 officers grabbed him before he could take 3 steps. Veterans from Samuel's unit started to move in as well, but Dugan's officers drew their weapons, pointing them directly at the crowd. "Anyone else takes a step forward," Dugan shouted. "They go down too." That's when a voice calm but commanding cut through the madness. "What the hell is going on here?" Heads turned. Pushing his way through the sea of mourners was a tall man in a dark suit. He held up a badge. "FBI Special Agent Marcus Reed," he announced. "Release the general. Now." Dugan didn't move. "This is a local matter. We have charges." Reed stepped closer. I've been investigating civil rights violations in this department for months. What I just witnessed confirms every report I've received. You're done here." Dugan's jaw clenched. His grip on Eliza didn't loosen. I said release her. Reed ordered again, but Dugan shook his head. "She's coming with us. We'll process her at county, no exceptions." Reed exchanged looks with his team. Cameras were everywhere. The whole country was watching. Dugan leaned down toward Eliza's ear, just loud enough for her to hear. "You'll never make it out of this in one piece," he whispered. Eliza turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. "You're wrong," she whispered back. "The world's already watching." And she was right. By the time Dugan hauled her toward the waiting patrol car, social media had already exploded. Veterans, families, journalists, everyone was posting the footage. The moment the sheriff pulled that gun, the moment she stood tall, the moment he forced her into the dirt, it was all out there. And it was only the beginning, because the people watching weren't just angry, they were ready to rise. They didn't let her change out of her uniform. When they dragged General Eliza Monroe through the back entrance of the county jail, she was still wearing her full military dress, still wearing her medals, still wearing the same stars they tried to tear off her shoulder, and they did it on purpose. Every guard who walked past her looked her up and down, some with smirks, some shaking their heads, a few whispered under their breath. They knew who she was. They knew exactly what they were doing, stripped of rank, stripped of dignity, but not broken. Eliza kept her head high as they booked her, took her fingerprints, and shoved her into a holding cell that smelled like sweat and bleach. The walls were cold. The bench was colder. The lights were too bright. The noise, constant. But Eliza had been in worse. She'd seen war zones that would break most people in a day. She wasn't going to let them see her crack now. Not here. Not like this. Hours passed. No phone call. No lawyer. Just silence. At least, that's what she thought until the door creaked open again. A female guard stepped in. Officer Linda Jackson. Young, sharp eyes. But there was something different about the way she carried herself. She didn't sneer. She didn't smirk. She barely made eye contact. Jackson lowered her voice, just enough for Eliza to hear. "Keep your head down. They're planning to move you to general population. No bail, no hearing." Judge Hartman signed the order himself. That name hit Eliza like a punch to the gut. Judge Hartman, same name Samuel, had flagged in his files. A man tied to the Dominion Circle. A man known for handing down the harshest sentences to Black, Latino, and Native defendants. They weren't just trying to humiliate her, they were trying to bury her. Jackson hesitated, glancing toward the security camera in the corner. Then she slipped something onto the metal bench and walked out without another word. It was a small, disposable food tray, but underneath, hidden in the paper napkin, was a burner phone. Eliza didn't hesitate. She grabbed it, turned it on, and dialed the only number that mattered. "Mia." Her daughter's voice cracked as soon as she answered. "Mom?" Eliza swallowed hard, fighting back the wave of emotion. "I'm okay. Listen carefully." She laid it all out. Judge Hartman, the Dominion Circle, the plan to disappear her in the system. She needed Mia to move fast, call the media, call the Pentagon, call everyone who still believed in what Samuel died fighting for. And Mia? She was already one step ahead. "Mom, the footage is everywhere. It's viral. The world saw what they did. Veterans are marching outside the jail right now. Hundreds of them. They're not going anywhere until they let you out." Eliza closed her eyes, clutching the phone tighter. "Mia, whatever happens next, you finish this. For your brother. For all of them." Mia's voice didn't shake. "Not this time. I promise, Mom, you're not alone anymore." Eliza ended the call and hid the phone back in the tray just as the door opened again. Officer Jackson didn't say a word, but for the first time, Eliza saw it in her eyes. Someone inside this broken system still had a conscience. And as they moved her to general population, Eliza Monroe knew this fight was far from over. The video didn't just make headlines, it cracked the foundation of every lie they tried to build around her. By the time the sun came up the next morning, it had already been shared millions of times. Cell phone footage, news camera angles, slow-motion replays. People didn't have to guess what happened, they saw it. They saw Sheriff Dugan press that gun to General Eliza Monroe's head at her own son's funeral. They heard his words. They watched her stand tall. They saw her tackled into the dirt. And America, was furious. From coast to coast, veterans started showing up. Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Black, White, Latino, Asian, Native American, standing shoulder to shoulder outside that jail. Some in full dress uniforms, some in old fatigues, all of them holding signs. Justice for General Monroe. We stand with Eliza. Protect those who protect us. The media camped outside all night. Reporters from every network tried to get statements from the sheriff's department, but Dugan had gone quiet. Not a word. Not a press conference. Nothing. Inside the jail, Eliza heard the noise building outside. Chanting. Drums. Voices rising together. She pressed her hand against the cold wall, knowing they were out there for her. She wasn't invisible anymore, and neither were they. Meanwhile, back at the federal building, Agent Marcus Reed and his team weren't waiting for permission. They knew the sheriff's department was scrambling, probably covering their tracks. Reed called an emergency meeting with the U.S. attorney. "We've got enough to move on them right now," he said. "But if we wait too long, they'll bury the rest of the evidence." The U.S. attorney nodded. "You have your green light. Go get them." Reed's team started pulling surveillance footage, phone records, everything they could find on Dugan and his network. But they needed something stronger, something that would tie the Dominion Circle to more than just harassment, something that could blow the entire operation wide open. That's when Eliza's daughter, Mia, stepped in. She showed up at Reed's office with a laptop, shaking but determined. "My brother didn't just leave behind notes," she explained. "He left proof." Mia played a series of audio files Samuel had secretly recorded. Meetings, phone calls, names, dates. And right there, in the middle of it all, Sheriff Dugan's voice, talking about cleaning up the department, talking about putting people back in their place, bragging about having judges, politicians, even military contacts on their side. But the worst part, the part that made Reed's blood run cold, was hearing Dugan mention Samuel by name. "He's getting too close. Time to ship him somewhere he can't cause any more problems." That was it. The smoking gun they needed. Reed leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. They killed her son to shut him up. It wasn't just police corruption anymore. It was conspiracy. It was abuse of power. And it was murder. Back at the jail, Officer Jackson slipped into Eliza's cell once again. "FBI's making moves," she whispered. "Looks like you're about to have some company." Eliza stood slowly, squaring her shoulders. "About time," she replied, because the walls were closing in on Dugan, and the world was finally watching. It started with a single courtroom, but by the time General Eliza Monroe took the stand, the entire country was watching. The trial of Sheriff Richard Dugan was being broadcast live on national television. Packed galleries, overflow rooms, veterans, journalists, politicians, people who'd never paid attention to court proceedings were now hanging on every word. And Eliza? She didn't flinch under the spotlight. She stood tall in her uniform, clean, pressed, stars shining like she was standing at attention in front of her entire nation. Because in a way, she was. The prosecutor started slow. Timeline, chain of events, the surveillance video, the cell phone footage, the threats, the abuse of power. But it wasn't until they played the audio from Samuel's recordings that the courtroom truly shifted. Sheriff Dugan's voice echoed through the speakers. "He's getting too close. Time to ship him somewhere he can't cause any more problems." And then another voice. "A judge. We'll call it a training rotation. No one will question it." The room went dead silent. That was the moment everything changed. Because now, it wasn't just about what happened at a funeral. It was about a system, a network, a decades-long conspiracy targeting minority service, members silencing them, punishing them, ending their careers, and sometimes ending their lives. The defense tried to fight back, claimed Dugan was misunderstood, claimed Eliza was exaggerating, claimed the audio was taken out of context. But Eliza took the stand with a calmness that cut deeper than any cross-examination. "My son died serving this country," she said, voice steady. "And the people who sent him to that grave wore the same badges they told us to trust." The defense attorney tried to rattle her, tried to bring up old military decisions, tried to question her credibility. But Eliza had spent 3 decades walking battlefields across the globe. There was nothing that lawyer could say that would shake her. "He trusted me to finish what he started," she said. "And that's what I'm doing right now." When the jury left to deliberate, the city held its breath. It took less than 6 hours. Guilty, on all counts: abuse of power, conspiracy, civil rights violations, attempted murder, and the charge that struck hardest of all criminal negligence in the death of Captain Samuel Taylor. As the verdict was read, Eliza didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She simply lowered her head, whispering something only those nearest her could hear. Justice begins now. Outside, the reaction was explosive. Crowds erupted into chants. Bells rang. Car horns blared. It wasn't celebration, it was release. Years of silence cracking open in a single moment of truth. Veterans saluted her. Mothers hugged her. Even police officers, those not part of the Dominion Circle, approached her with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," one whispered. "You gave us back our voice." But Eliza didn't stay long in the spotlight. As cameras followed her out of the courthouse, she paused just once, turned to the press, looked into the lens. "There are more of them," she said. "This doesn't end here." And then she walked away. Because for General Monroe, the mission wasn't over, not even close. They sentenced him to life. No chance of parole. No way out. When Sheriff Richard Dugan heard those words, his face didn't move. Not a blink. Not a single twitch. But Eliza Monroe saw it. She saw the fear hiding behind that stone-cold stare. Because men like Dugan never think it's going to catch up to them. But it did. And not just to him. Within weeks, dozens of other officers connected to the Dominion Circle were arrested. Chiefs, captains, detectives, even judges who'd spent years protecting the system that silenced so many. Some took plea deals. Some flipped on their brothers in uniform. And the state of Texas? Forced to act. Governor Jackson Davis, after weeks of staying silent, stood on the Capitol steps with a stack of executive orders in his hand. He called it the Veterans Protection Reform Package, a sweeping law designed to root out discrimination against service members in every law enforcement agency across the state. It mandated third-party oversight, mandatory body cams, whistleblower protections, and most importantly, civilian review boards with real power to hold officers accountable. And the Houston Police Department? It would never be the same. Federal monitors were assigned to oversee reforms. Officers who had once stayed silent began speaking out. Veterans who had been targeted finally had their stories heard. And standing at the center of it all was Eliza Monroe. She didn't ask for the spotlight. She never wanted fame. But when the country looked for a face to stand beside hers, was the face they turned to. And she carried that weight like she always had, with quiet strength and unshakable purpose. A year later, on the anniversary of Samuel's funeral, they gathered again at Pine Grove Cemetery. But this time, there were no guns, no threats, no shouting, just silence. Respectful, reverent. The Valor section had a new addition, a towering black granite wall engraved with the names of service members who had faced discrimination and harassment after serving their country. At the top, in bold letters, "We remember, we fight on." And right there, next to that wall, Eliza finally received the flag she'd been denied the year before. With the honor guard standing tall, the folded flag was placed in her hands, this time without interruption. This time, with the nation watching and standing with her. As the last notes of taps echoed through the air, Governor Davis approached the podium. This wasn't just a memorial. It was the signing of the Marcus Taylor Military Justice Act, a law named after her son. A law that would protect every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine returning home to Texas. The governor's voice cracked as he read the final words. "Let no one who has worn the uniform fear retribution for standing up for justice. This is our promise, sealed by sacrifice." The crowd erupted into applause. Veterans saluted. Families wiped away tears. And then, as if on cue, an all-too-familiar figure appeared at the edge of the ceremony. Senator Howard Maxwell. He hadn't been charged. Yet, his lawyers had managed to stall every investigation. But everyone knew. They knew his fingerprints were all over the Dominion Circle. And there he was, walking toward Eliza with cameras rolling, pretending to offer condolences. He held out his hand. And that's when Eliza did something no one expected. She didn't take it. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a voice recorder, and with a steady voice, she spoke 6 words that would bring the house of cards crashing down. "Senator Maxwell, I have your voice." The crowd went silent. And just like that, the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The arrest came at dawn. Senator Howard Maxwell, once the most untouchable man in Texas politics, was led out of his estate in handcuffs. The cameras caught every second. No private deal, no backroom escape. No spin could save him now. The audio recording Eliza Monroe had handed over to federal investigators sealed his fate. Proof that Maxwell had ordered Samuel Taylor's unit moved into a high-risk combat zone. Proof that the so-called accident wasn't an accident at all. It was a setup. The charges? Conspiracy, abuse of power, tampering with military operations, and most damning of all, negligent homicide in the death of Captain Samuel Taylor. Eliza didn't show up for the media circus. She didn't need to. The truth was doing just fine on its own. Over the next year, more arrests followed. Across the country, other cities launched investigations into their own departments. Officers, judges, even contractors some connected to the same network Maxwell had built were finally facing accountability. But for Eliza Monroe, the real victory wasn't in the headlines. It was at her son's grave. 1 year later, she stood there alone. No cameras, no speeches, just her and the quiet rustle of the wind through the trees. She placed her hand on the smooth marble headstone. "We finished what you started, Sam," she whispered. "And I swear, I'll keep fighting." Not far from that spot stood the new memorial wall. The names of soldiers who had faced discrimination were now engraved in stonino, longer erased from history. Above the names, in bold letters, the words Samuel had once written in his notes. Truth doesn't die in silence. Eliza had made sure of that. The Wright Foundation, named in honor of both her family and the fight they had endured, was officially open. A nationwide network offering legal aid, protection, and advocacy for veterans and service members targeted by discrimination or corruption. And leading the first integrity unit inside the reformed Houston Police Department, Officer David Chen, promoted to lieutenant. Standing tall in a department that had nearly destroyed him. On the national stage, Eliza had accepted a new role at the Pentagon advising on military justice reform, making sure what happened to Samuel would never happen to another soldier again. But she never stopped visiting that grave, because no matter how much the world changed, she knew some wounds never fully heal. And yet, through it all, she stood unshaken, because Eliza Monroe had learned the hardest lesson of all, that real patriotism isn't blind loyalty. It's standing up when your country falls short. It's holding the people in power accountable to the promises they make to freedom, to equality, to justice for all. She had faced guns, corruption, humiliation, and loss, but she never surrendered. And because of her, the system that tried to silence her son was forced to answer for what it had done. So the next time someone tells you that one voice can't make a difference, tell them about General Eliza Monroe. Tell them about Samuel Taylor. Tell them about the day a grieving mother stood alone and changed a nation. You know, when you've lived through enough seasons of life, you start to realize not all battles are fought with weapons or uniforms. Some of the hardest battles are fought with your voice, your courage, and your willingness to stand up when it would be easier to sit down. The story of General Eliza Monroe reminds us that no one, no matter their age or background, is ever too small to challenge injustice. She didn't back down when the system tried to silence her, and she didn't let fear keep her from speaking the truth, even when the cost was high. It's easy to feel like the world is too far gone, too divided, but the truth is, the most powerful change often starts in the smallest places or homes, our communities, our conversations around the dinner table. Your voice still matters. Your life experience carries weight, and the values you pass on to the next generation could shape the future in ways you may never see. So don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to remind the world that justice, fairness, and truth are worth standing for, no matter how old we get. Because real change always starts with us. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to click the like button to help share its message with others. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss more powerful stories about justice, resilience, and the everyday heroes among us. Because the journey to a better world still needs all of us walking it together.